Madam President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I ask the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I come to the floor today, as I do week after week, to talk about the health care law and offer a doctor's second opinion about this health care law. I do that as someone who's practiced medicine in Wyoming, taking care of families across the Cowboy State for about a quarter of a century. And I do it as today because we are now approaching the second anniversary of the President's health care law. And as predicted by many on my side of the aisle, the negative results continue to roll in. And billions of taxpayer dollars continue to roll out. Each week we learn more about how this law is going to break another one of the President's promises. He made a lot of promises, one of which he said it would not add a dime to the deficit. Well, it is now clear that the White House and Democrats in Congress completely underestimated, possibly intentionally, but certainly vocally underestimated how much the President's new entitlement program is going to cost the American people. And I come week after week because Nancy Pelosi said, first you have to pass it before you get to find out what's in it. Well, this past week a story came out that talks about the high-risk pools designed and established to cover people who weren't able to buy health insurance in the individual market prior to the health care law. The goal was admirable. The plan, though, that they came out with was horrible. First, the new Obama high-risk plans created more bureaucracy, more government, and it undermined what states like mine and Wyoming were already successfully doing. Next, the White House and the Democrats who crammed this bill through Congress and down the throats of the American people, well, they set aside $5 billion for this program. The money was supposed to last, they said, till 2014, no problems. The bad news is that the Medicare's chief actuary, the official who actually tracks the spending that goes on as a result of this law, well, he estimated now that the funding could run out much earlier than expected. Last week, the Washington Post explained how this could happen. It reported that, quote, medical costs for enrollees in the health care law's high-risk insurance pools are expected to more than double initial predictions. More than double the initial predictions by the Democrats who voted for this health care law. So the costs for enrollees are expected to be more than double what the White House and the Democrats predicted when they drafted the law, as the American people remember, behind closed doors. The President promised, oh, this would be open, C-SPAN, people would be able to see the discussions and the debates. Everything was done behind closed doors. And yet our debt as a nation continues to skyrocket. It is completely unsustainable and it's irresponsible. And you know it could have been prevented. It could have been prevented if the White House and Congress had just let the American people participate in the process. So here we are 2 years later, a second anniversary coming up of a health care law, and a law that the American people are now learning what is in it, because as Nancy Pelosi said, first you have to pass it before you get to find out what's in it. The American people also know that this administration and this President and this Congress used about every budget trick and accounting gimmick in the book to turn it into law. They ignored the real costs. They ignored the red flags, and they ignored reality. 2 years later, the American people understand that we cannot afford the high costs of the President's health care law and health care mandates. The longer it stays in place, the more expensive it will get. And that's one of the reasons that Americans from both sides of the aisle are speaking out against this health care law. When I say both sides of the aisle, I want to talk about a recent USA Today Gallup poll. And this was Monday, February 27th, Monday's USA Today, front page story, right at the top, health care law hurting Obama. Madam President, my concern is that the health care law is hurting the American people. That's what the impact of this law is. It is hurting the American people. What the poll shows is that a clear majority of registered voters call the bill's passage, quote, a bad thing, and they support its repeal if a Republican wins the White House in November. 11% of voters in battleground states say the law has actually helped their families, but 15% say that it has hurt. Looking ahead, they predict that by a number of 42% to 20%, so 2 to 1, that the law will make things worse rather than better for their families and for their lives. Americans overwhelmingly believe the individual mandate, which is a principal key part of the Obama health care law, the individual mandate, is unconstitutional. The mandate that every American must buy insurance, Americans believe it is unconstitutional by a margin of 72% to only 20%. An overwhelming number of Americans believe what this Senate and the House under Democrat control and the President in the White House, Barack Obama, have forced down the throats of the American people. They believe, and I agree with them, it is unconstitutional. Even a majority of Democrats and a majority of those who think the health care law may be a good thing believe that that provision, that people across the country be forced to buy health insurance or to buy any product, is unconstitutional. So instead of heaping more debt onto the backs of American people, we need to repeal the law. We need to replace it with health care reform that allows Americans to have a bigger say, a patient-centered health care approach. I mean, it's interesting because when you look at this USA Today article, there's a picture of a family, a father, mother, 3 children, Robert Hargrove of Sanford, North Carolina. He said, you've got to have insurance and pay, or pay a penalty, question mark. That's not the way the country was set up. That tells the story that I heard around the state of Wyoming last week as I traveled, as other members traveled around their home communities and their home states. They remember the President's promise. He promised, one, that the cost of insurance for families would go down. The President promised it would go down by $2,500 per family per year. It's not what the American people have seen in the last 2 years since this has passed. They remember the President promising that if you like the care that you have and the insurance that you have, you can keep it. It's not what the American families are finding out. Broken promise after broken promise. And now, with the chief actuary coming out this past week in the Washington Post reporting that the high-risk pool doubling the costs that were predicted, once again, the President's promise that it wouldn't add a dime to the deficit. Another broken Obama promise. So here we are. I go to town hall meetings, visit with people, ask for a show of hands. How many of you believe under the President's new health care law that your costs are going to go up? Every hand goes up. Obviously, they don't believe what the President has told them. And how many of you believe that as a result of the new health care law that actually the quality of your care and the availability of your care will go down? Again, every hand goes up. It's not what the President promised the people of this country. And that's why when the USA Today headline on Monday says, health care law hurting Obama, my concern, Madam President, is it is hurting the American people. People asked for health care reform in this country. What they asked for was the care they need from the doctor that they want at a cost they can afford. This health care law has provided none of those things. This health care law is bad for patients. It's bad for providers, the nurses and the doctors who take care of those patients, and it's terrible for the American taxpayers. And that's why I come to the floor week after week with a doctor's second opinion, saying it is time to replace this health care law with reforms that will put health care under the control of patients, not insurance companies, not the government, but under the control of patients. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor and suggest the...
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, good morning to you and to everybody in the gallery. I wanted to thank Majority Leader Reid for highlighting next week's Banking Committee hearing on small business growth. It's something that we all here have a very dear and great concern with. One of the issues that will be discussed is a concept called crowdfunding. And people may be saying, what's crowdfunding? Well, if you've ever wished that you had the opportunity to invest in like a Facebook or a Google or a new idea before they hit it big, wouldn't that be nice? We'd all be multi-billionaires or whatever. My Democratizing Access to Capital Bill, S-1791, would expand entrepreneurs' access to capital by democratizing access to start-up investing so they can have the funds to grow and create jobs. The House passed a crowdfunding bill, 407 to 17, so you know they must be on to something when they can pass something in such a bipartisan manner. The President referenced it in his State of the Union. He supports crowdfunding, and public support for crowdfunding is, in fact, exploding. Just this week on Monday, I hosted a roundtable in Boston at City Hall on small business access to capital in Boston, and I listened to small business owners and entrepreneurs and investors to get their thoughts and concerns about business growth, about investing, about the access to capital, and it was a very, very successful event. They all had one thing to say, and that's if we can't get behind the bipartisan common sense idea of crowdfunding, then what actually can we, in fact, agree upon? And how can we expect small businesses to grow? With such strong support, I believe that we should put, once again, partisan politics aside and focus on what we can do to help small businesses, as we've done with the 1099 fix, as we have done with the 3% withholding, the Hire Hero veterans, the most recent insider trading, Stock Act, all my bills, all things I've worked on. We did it in a bipartisan manner when the leader let them come to the floor and, in fact, allow us to work them through. Passed 96 to 3, 100 to nothing. It shows that we in the Senate here can work together regardless of our political differences, our geographic locations, our belief on where we are, because we are Americans first. These are things that the business communities are looking at to move our country forward. And next Monday, I'm actually hosting a roundtable with an entity called WeFunder, a group of innovators who started a petition after my bill to discuss crowdfunding. And their petition currently has 2,500 supporters who would invest over $6 million today if businesses had the opportunity to participate in crowdfunding. But right now it's illegal. My bill is a common sense bill. And I want to note that Senator Merkley has also introduced a different crowdfunding bill. It's a good start, but we can do a little bit more. And I've reached out to his staff, and I've asked my staff to continue to do just that. So I think we can work together, as Senator Gillibrand and I and Senator Carper and Collins worked on the recent insider trading bill. We can do the same with Senator Merkley if he is willing and if the leader allows us to put those political party differences aside and actually work on something for the benefit of our country. Today I'm going to talk about some important principles that I believe are critical to making crowdfunding legislation a success. So just picture this. For crowdfunding to actually work, we need a national framework which my bill creates. If we require entrepreneurs to comply with every separate state securities law mandate, filing the appropriate paperwork alone would cost over $15,000. That's the reason we don't have this type of situation. We don't have these small business owners being able to, in my bill, give up to $1,000 per person, up to $1 million to invest in that next new idea with minimal SEC filings and minimal Secretary of State filings. It's something that just makes sense. We should not be burdening our startup businesses, which is where the largest growth is in this country right now, with costly quarterly reporting requirements. I mean, we might as well just go through the whole process of the full SEC filings. It's really not appropriate, especially until they are fully off the ground. The point of crowdfunding is to allow entrepreneurs to flourish, not to bog them down in the avalanche of paperwork and bureaucracy and red tape. That's why we're in this mess somewhat, is because of the overregulation, the continued regulatory and tax uncertainty when it comes to planning and growing businesses. In addition, I believe that our existing fraud laws are solid. We need really just to enforce them. Exposing startup founders to new personal liability, it's not going to work. It'll just be create a real wet blanket on everything that we're trying to do here. From thousands of investors who are investing only a maximum of $500 to $1,000, and to have them also put in a personal guarantee for $500 investment? How does that make any sense whatsoever? A quarterly filing, a personal liability guarantee for $500 investment? That makes no sense at all. So this will cause entrepreneurs to use crowdfunding only when there is no other option available, and will lead them to switch out crowdfunding investors for venture capital firms at the first opportunity, therefore, I believe, stifling that crowdfunding opportunity. There was a recent article I read which Canadian firms, Canada itself, the government is deeply concerned about us actually doing this because they're fearful that Canadian money will be flowing into the United States. I mean, gosh, wouldn't it be nice for once to have money flowing into the United States on something that will actually create small business growth in our great country? So recognizing that investors need protection, my bill does require entrepreneurs to offer their securities through regulated crowdfunding intermediaries. In addition, my bill requires intermediaries to facilitate communication between investors and the offerers. And I believe that Senator Merkley and I have the same concerns in this regard, which I believe can be addressed without creating a private right of action. It's really not necessary, especially for the amount of money we're talking about and the new business growth opportunities we can actually stimulate. Crowdfunding depends on small investments by many, which is why we must exempt crowdfunding securities from the 500 shareholder cap so we don't create additional red tape for startups. It just makes total sense. Everyone talks about overregulation of small business and how that is hurting their growth. I see it, you see it, where you live, Mr. President, and in legalizing, let me repeat, in legalizing crowdfunding, I believe we can still provide for the appropriate level of regulation, but also give small businesses the access to capital that they so desperately, desperately need. This is just a home run all over the place. And once again, I'm very pleased that the Majority Leader has taken an additional step to call for the hearing on crowdfunding. When he came and talked about this issue, he referenced Senator Merkley's bill. I also have a bill. So why don't we do it like we did it with the insider trading bill, the Hire a Hero, the 3% withholding, the 1099, the Arlington Cemetery bill, all those things. When we were allowed to work in a truly bipartisan manner, we were able to get it done. Because, with all due respect, there's no Republican bill that's going to pass right now. And I know that shocks some people. There's no Democrat bill that's going to pass either. It needs to be a bipartisan, bicameral bill that the President is going to sign. And that's what I offer, is that olive branch, that one good deed that begets another good deed that begets another good deed and moves us forward and forward and forward to addressing our very real problems in a truly bipartisan manner as Americans first and not as Republicans or Democrats. So I would ask the Majority Leader to also include my bill when he's moving forward, because otherwise I'm fearful that nothing will move forward. So I'm looking forward to not only working with Senator Merkley, but working with the Majority Leader and his team. I'll tell you, when I was working on the insider trading bill, my bill, Senator Gellibrand's bill, that we combined, we found that common ground. We worked together. We managed the floor. We had an open amendment process. Everybody walked out of here saying, "Wow, that was nice." Gosh, when's the last time we did that? Remember? It was unbelievable. I mean, everyone had a role. Even Senator Kirk, who's recovering, had a role to play, and it was good to see. And we can do it even in this bill. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I want to thank you for the time, and I yield the floor at this time. I see that we have a speaker all ready to go as well.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the time from 2 to 4 p.m. be equally divided with Senator Blunt or his designee in control of the first hour and the majority side controlling the second hour.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I actually would like to say a few words today about the amendment that's being called the Blunt Amendment, the purpose of which I will read from the amendment is to amend the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act to provide rights of conscience with regard to requirements for coverage of specific items and services. Mr. President, I oppose this amendment. I'd like to be very clear today as to why I oppose this amendment. This is not really a bill that attempts to address the necessary divide between church and state. Now, let me say that a little more specifically. This is not an amendment that addresses the necessary divide between the establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof as outlined in the First Amendment of our Constitution, which is a concept that I care deeply about. This amendment, by definition, attempts to widen the restrictions on our laws from the necessary divide between church and state into the unknown and often undefinable provinces of an individual's personal definition of conscience. The amendment is clear on this point. Its preamble, in which it lists its findings, talks repeatedly about the rights of conscience, not the separation of church and state. It invokes Thomas Jefferson's view of the rights of conscience against the enterprise of civil authority. It addresses the purported flaws of the current health care law in terms of governmental infringement on the rights of conscience of insurers, purchasers of insurance, plan sponsors, beneficiaries, and other stakeholders. It then mandates that the right to provide, purchase, or enroll in health care coverage must be consistent with the religious beliefs or the moral convictions of these stakeholders. And again, let me be clear. This language goes well beyond the constitutional requirement of separation of church and state into the area of legislative discretion. Quite frankly, Mr. President, it would be the same thing as Congress saying that not only should religious establishments be exempted from taxation under the doctrine of separation of church and state, but also that anyone who has a moral objection that they can define to paying taxes should not be required to pay them either. There's a place for this type of conduct in our legal framework. It has a long history. It is called civil disobedience. The act of civil disobedience is protected by our Constitution, but the ramifications are not. Unless there are clear constitutional protections, legal accountability remains. Well, Mr. President, the effect of this amendment on its face would be that any stakeholder could decide to deny health care benefits to any individual on the very loose definition that to provide such care somehow violates a personal definition of one's moral convictions. In other words, any provider could potentially deny a wide range of benefits to anybody. This is a vaguely drafted and potentially harmful amendment, Mr. President. It is not about protecting religious institutions or protecting the clearly objective and understandable parameters of religious belief. It should not be approved. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Montana.
Mr. President, I would ask consent as if to speak in morning business.
Without objection.
I want to thank the President, and I also want to thank the floor manager of the Highway Bill for allowing me a couple minutes to let them know how appreciative I am of their efforts to move forward on an important piece of legislation, the highway legislation. Nothing creates jobs and makes our economy stronger in the long run than responsibly investing in our infrastructure. So I want to thank Senator Boxer and Senator Inhofe for their good work, and hopefully that good work will come to fruition hopefully very, very soon. Last September, Mr. President, the Department of Labor published new child labor regulations. They would have the effect of restricting how and which young folks are able to work on farms. I am deeply concerned with these new rules, which will keep teenagers from working at farms and ranches. As the Senate's only working farmer, I know how important it is for young people to have the opportunity to work on farms and ranches. I'm not alone in that. There are many folks here that understand the value of family farm agriculture. Myself, growing up on the same farm that my grandparents homesteaded nearly a century ago, well, it was a century ago this year, my brothers and I were expected to bale the hay, pick rocks, feed the livestock, do the field work, the list goes on and on and on. That work ethic that was instilled in us as youngsters was a big part of my success today, and it was a work ethic that built this nation, and a work ethic that I think is critical to the future of America. The skills that young people learn from working on a family farm translate into a healthy work ethic that will serve them their entire lives, whether they choose to be in agriculture or in some other business. Family farm agriculture is one of the foundations of this country, and irresponsibly regulating the ability of young people to fully experience and grow from it will be detrimental to this country's future. I know firsthand that agriculture is uniquely a family industry in the United States, in Montana, and throughout rural America. Young people are expected to help out on the family farm or ranch. That's part of the economics of family agriculture. For smaller farms and ranches to survive, it has to be everybody pitching in. And by participating in production agriculture, young people learn the value of a day's work. They also learn that grain doesn't come from a box, or vegetables don't come from a bag, or meat doesn't come from a package. They truly get educated about where our food comes from while they build that work ethic. Well, these new rules get in the way of that education. That's because these rules were not written with a solid understanding of how family production agriculture works today. You know, we're losing family farms every day. In my hometown of Big Sandy, for example, that community, I went to school with about 40 kids or so in my high school class. Today there are about 60 kids in the entire high school. That's because family farms are getting bigger and there are fewer folks living in rural America. We ought to be encouraging beginning farmers and ranchers, preparing them to be our next generation of food producers in this country. The proposed rules would expand restrictions on what duties teenagers can perform on farms, limit them. Under these new rules, all animal operations would be off limits until a person reaches 16 years of age. That's a sad, sad day, a missed opportunity, and a loss of an opportunity for our young folks to learn. I'm calling on the Department of Labor to withdraw this proposal as it applies to family farm agriculture, and allow this country's youth to learn a solid work ethic and the common sense that goes with that work ethic that's so critically important to our nation's future. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The surface transportation bill is the pending business on the Senate floor today as negotiations over unrelated amendments to the bill continue. Those amendments have snagged debate. Most of the focus has been on this contraception amendment offered by Senator Roy Blunt, allowing insurance providers to decline to offer coverage if they're morally opposed to it. We heard Senator Boxer of California earlier today say the vote on that amendment will happen tomorrow morning. Debate could be a little bit slow and stretches this afternoon. Members of the congressional leadership are having lunch with the President and Vice President. And later tonight, President Obama and the First Lady will be hosting a black tie dinner honoring Iraq war veterans and their guests.
Aggressive. Thank you.